The American Conference is reportedly talking to Air Force, and I bet you I know why.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth: realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and so much more. I love having this sport pack. It's really great, and I love that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of an NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We're going to talk plenty today about the most interesting and unpredictable conference championship race. That is the Big 12. But first, Air Force, according to several reports, is in serious conversations with the American Conference, which would be a significant blow to the Mountain West's long-term viability. They might go after a couple Conference USA teams like New Mexico State or UTEP, for instance. But here's the catch. I'm thinking that the American Conference is making a move or is having preliminary conversations with the Falcons for two reasons. Number one, put all 3 service academies in your league. Those games do well on television. I think that'd be a smart move. And number two, Pac-12 is getting ready to make a move. The Pac-12 has reportedly, according to Bruce Feldman, who reported on College Game Day, they were talking to Tulane and Memphis, and that there is interest there. They could be talking to more American schools. As the American Athletic Conference currently stands, there is no reason, absolutely none, that they need to go add another team. The only reason I believe, this is just my intuition, shall we say, that they would go out and make contact with Air Force and allow that information to be public is because they know that there is a real chance that they could need to backfill because they could lose Tulane, because they could lose Memphis, and they could go to the rebuilt Pac-12. And if that happens, that rebuilt Pac-12 will have an excellent chance to get into the playoff in a 5-year stretch, probably 3 or 4 times, because that league is going to be the premier Group of 5 conference in the country. Now, this move hasn't happened yet, and this is all ongoing. And I do still think the Pac-12 is going to wait and see what happens with the ACC. Does a cross-country partnership with Wake Forest and Syracuse suddenly become available? Do Stanford and Cal come back to the Pac-12? I don't think that they would, and I don't think it's likely that any of those ACC teams become available. But do you wait and see? Absolutely, because you can afford to with the timeline the Pac-12 is operating with here. So as soon as I saw that Air Force news, I said, wait, with the American doesn't need unless they're going to need teams. Or here's the other side of the coin. I'll just throw it out there. Air Force is as affordable now, or in a position of less leverage now that they're in a significantly hindered Mountain West starting in 2026, and the American just wants to add them. Maybe that's all it is. But boy, my mind went straight to, let the dominoes continue to fall, because the dominoes always fall. And they never stop falling. They haven't stopped since USC and UCLA announced the move. You can go back to Texas and Oklahoma. This has been, what are we, in year 3, 4-ish, something like that, of announcing these realignment moves and talking about what could happen. It's not going to stop. Whether you want it to or not, it is not going to stop. But if the Pac-12 pulls off getting Tulane and Memphis, it doesn't matter who they get next. They will have taken a significant step forward towards ensuring their long-term viability. But nothing has happened yet. This is all just speculation, rumor, hearsay, discussion, thinking about it. Maybe we'll do it. But you got those premier Mountain West teams on board. One thing that has been written about by Ross Dellinger and others is the television deal, which at the moment for the year 2026 doesn't exist for the Pac-12. Do you think Boise State and Fresno State and San Diego State and Colorado State would jump to the conference if Pac-12 Commissioner Teresa Gould didn't have at least a strong level of confidence that they're going to be able to get a television deal? Do you think those conversations have happened? I spoke at length throughout the summer about this league and how they navigate the space and whether, they need to start having conversations. And I said many times, whether you're talking to schools or television networks, you have to start talking now. And I think it's pretty clear that since Teresa Gould took over earlier this year, she's hit the ground running and she has started having these conversations. And that is a great thing if you are a fan of the Pac-12, specifically Oregon State and Washington State. The Cougs should be ranked. They're not. Oregon State should have a solid year, but you've now got Boise, Fresno, Colorado State, and San Diego State coming in. Not a bad place to be. Let's talk about some actual football here, because that's something that is allowed on this show, per me, the rules creator and executive producer here on Locked On College Football. Michigan is changing quarterbacks. Now, this shouldn't come as a surprise. Davis Warren, through 3 games, has led Michigan to a 2-1 record. They haven't had a great performance yet. I don't think Michigan's played their best football game of the year so far, and the quarterback's a reason for that. 67% completion, 6.2 yards per completion, 2 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. So Alex Orji is going to come in, and Davis Warren goes out. Here's a question I have for Michigan. I'm going to get to the optimistic side. I'll start with the pessimistic side. If you're excited about the prospect of changing quarterbacks ahead of USC, who have been rolling to start the season, and putting your quarterback up on the same field with Miller Moss on the other side, I bid you good luck. But there is some reason, Sharon Moore's never going to fully say, but there is some reason that Alex Orji wasn't the starter on day one. So as bad as Davis Warren has been, and he has been really bad, he's not getting benched because of a personal vendetta. He's not playing well enough. I think everybody can see that. There is a reason that he won the job over Alex Orji. I don't know what that reason is. Maybe we'll see those reasons this week against USC. That does not bode well for the Wolverines, that you are undergoing a shift like that against a Trojans team that's looking to prove the entire country wrong, except me, because I believed in USC before the season started. And hey, I predicted him to go 9-3. I might even have undersold him. Maybe USC is a 10-11 win team this year. We'll see if they can go get the job done in Ann Arbor this week. But for Michigan, here's the optimistic look at it. Back in 2021, there was a program then in the aforementioned Pac-12 known as the Utah Utes. And they began the season with Charlie Brewer at quarterback. He won the job over Cam Rising. That sounds pretty crazy today, doesn't it? Because you know what Cam Rising's done, and you know what he's capable of. But he won the job. He beat him out. Sometimes coaches make mistakes. Sometimes well-run organizations, sometimes good offensive minds pick the wrong guy. They see the results on the field, a shift is made, and it changes the entire trajectory of the season. And that's what Michigan is looking for Alex Orji to do, because there are no other options on that roster that are going to suddenly elevate what they've gotten out of the quarterback position over the first couple of games. And if Michigan can't get anything more than what Davis Warren has given them in the first couple of weeks, this will probably be a 7-8 win season for Michigan. And I thought it might be more like an 8 or 9 win season. But 9 wins is not going to roll around for the Wolverines with their schedule if you continue getting this level of quarterback play. We know that Michigan doesn't have to have, a Heisman winner at quarterback. Even if you have a mega talent like J.J. McCarthy, you don't have to go out there and throw for 300 yards a week. But you got to be good. You got to be capable. J.J. McCarthy was really good. Remember what put this Michigan team over the hump, or the program over the hump? Cade McNamara couldn't do it. J.J. McCarthy did. That's not an accident. Even though the numbers don't wow you, you still need to be able to make some high-level throws and be a threat to throw the football. And Michigan has had no passing game through the first 3 weeks. Absolutely none that you need to be aware of. So I'm not surprised that they're making the change. I don't think doing it ahead of the USC game is the best timing. It would have been a lot better to do this when they played Arkansas State last week. But they wanted to give Davis Warren one more shot. And now they're making adjustments offensively against a USC team that so far has looked really, really good. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter, at @SMcLaughlinCFB. Do you know what the most wide open conference title race in the entire country is? It's the Big 12. And it's so entertaining. I don't want this season to ever end. It's so much fun. Who's going to win it? I don't know. That's coming up next. Hey, Locked On College Football fans, have you heard about ROY? It stands for Return on You, and it's a new platform that lets you, the fans, get involved in NIL like never before by making contributions directly to your favorite athletes. By supporting players directly, you can help shape rosters, retain talent, and keep your favorite athletes out of the transfer portal. As you all know, NIL has changed the game for athletes, and ROY changes the NIL game for the fans. What makes ROY different is the direct support to players. ROY allows fans to directly back their favorite college athletes. With ROY, fans can play a key role in shaping the future of their favorite teams, while athletes maximize their name, image, and likeness potential. Download ROY for iOS or Android and enter referral code LOCKEDON, 2 words, and you'll automatically be entered into a sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com for additional details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get the ROY app for iOS or Android. Start making an impact on your favorite team, whoever that is. Use referral code LOCKEDON for an opportunity to win $5,000 cash. Visit joinroy.com. That's where you go. Joinroy.com for more details. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Get off the sidelines and into the NIL game with ROY. The Big 12 is the most open conference championship race in the country. We thought that coming into the year, and boy, we think that through the first 3 weeks of the season. Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12, returning to join me here on the show. Drake, I want to say Utah will figure it out, but at this point, I don't know if I can trust Cam Rising to stay on the field as much as I can trust Jamarcus Russell to read a playbook. So what are you making of the Big 12 right now? Because teams like BYU, who we're going to talk about later in today's show, they're kind of tossing their hat into the ring, sort of, kind of, maybe. TCU and UCF both look good. Who's winning this conference?
Yeah, Utah at this point is still number one in my power rankings, and I'm not sure if you can take them away. They were there preseason. They were the fancy pick from the national media to win the Big 12. They were the best roster on paper, and they still have that by and large. There have been injuries already on the defense that are hurting Utah, and with Cam Rising out, this is not the same football team. Isaac Wilson stepped up in the second half, looked a lot better against Utah State, and showed you he can be a more competent, I believe more competent, backup option than anybody they had last year as they were rotating a couple of guys trying to win in 2023. You can find more continuity with Wilson. However, he's not Cam Rising. And without Cam Rising, I cannot trust Utah. With him, we haven't learned yet. He's played four quarters of football this season so far, and in those 4 quarters, I haven't looked and said, all right, that is the quarterback that makes the difference in the Big 12 so far. However, again, still number one in my power rankings. But then there's Kansas State, Avery Johnson. Every third throw is one of the worst throws I've seen in college football. Oh, he's open! And then Avery Johnson just sails it to the hot girl in the third row of the student section. But the other 2 throws, and one of the 3 is going to be an elite pass, and the kid can run for days. Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman leads the conference in passing yards. Alan Bowman leads the conference in passing yards. And
I'm trying not to say anything. I'm struggling with that being a real stat through more than one game.
Because we sat here weeks ago and last week and the week before that and said, Alan Bowman's not going to push the needle. And I still don't think Alan Bowman pushes the needle more than Avery Johnson or Cam Rising. But he has played his role to this point, and the stats line up. And granted, they're not playing world beaters or even the top tier of the Big 12 or teams equivalent yet, but Oklahoma State is still certainly a player. Now, UCF, I like KJ Jefferson a lot. Same thing as Avery Johnson. Every third pass, he just throws it right into the ground. Like, oh, I'm going to spike it. But then again, those 13 completions he had, there were clutch moments where he leads his team back from 28-7 on the road to win a football game. And his legs, he can run for days. Iowa State, don't forget them. They're a player in winning the Big 12 conference. Rocco Beck, Abu Sama, Jalen Knoll. They showed you that offense can score 20 points in one half against Iowa. They are dangerous enough to win the Big 12. And then you already mentioned, you have the BYUs, the TCUs, even a sneaky, could Arizona put a couple things together, not based on the way they played against Kansas State, but still they've got the offensive talent. And Arizona State has maybe the best running back in the conference in Cam Scadaboo. At least he's shown that he can be that kind of playmaker for the Sun Devils. The Big 12's got 5 teams to me that can win the conference right now, and another 2, 3, 4 that can vie for it.
Arizona is not one of those teams to me. I didn't feel that way about them coming into the year. They have backed that up through 3 games with a bad defensive showing, a bad offensive showing, and a bad overall showing once they played a real football team. And I know that Noah Fafita and T-Mac are great, but I felt this watching the Kansas State game on Friday night, Drake, that Arizona has got the 11-4 connection and literally nothing else that they can rely on.
Yeah.
I don't see anything else. And then I texted this to you after the game ended. My takeaway from UCF going to TCU and winning in what was just an incredible football game, really disappointing for Sonny Dykes Horned Frogs to blow a 28-7 lead at home. My takeaway, Drake, is that both of those teams are good. We talked about TCU being one of the most underrated teams in the country, certainly the most underrated in the Big 12 entering this season. I think Josh Hoover is legit. I think UCF with Gus Malzahn is exactly what I thought they'd be. Yeah. I thought they'd lose the football game. It's a coin flip, go either way. I think Arizona comes down from the conference title contending ring. Utah could if Cam Rising's not going to be healthy. And I think both UCF and TCU can catapult themselves into that conversation.
Yeah, in the Arizona conversation, I'm not too high on them, but I'm still going to leave them in the category, in that middle of the pack category. Got to remember, the 5 teams that I named didn't feature Arizona, and past that, the 6 through 9 range feature a whole lot of squads that are at least comparable. They have that one glaring hole, whether it be offensively or defensively or inconsistent performances. And as for TCU, Spencer, they threw the ball 53 times. And UCF threw the ball 22 times. That stat right there is not conducive to a 28-7 comeback for UCF. Why was TCU still throwing the football in this game? They ran the ball 17 times for 58 yards all game. That is coaching malpractice. You are up 28-7. Just run the football. And that guy with the last name Briles, son of Art Briles, former coach at Baylor, and feels like half the TCU staff has some connection to that staff, goes, we can throw it through the air and stop the clock. And that's exactly what they did. They never established the ground game. And when you're up by 21 points and your opponent's rushing for nearly 300, you have got to do. He's gashing your defense on the ground. Gus Malzahn is. You have got to do something to run some clock, and TCU didn't.
I share the concern about the defense and the run game, but when you have an explosive pass game, that's what Sonny Dykes' team was a couple years ago.
I'm not that worried about the TCU defense. And even watching this game in the second half, I was like, yeah, there was a breakdown, no doubt. But the offense was like, look at us. We can throw the ball and keep our defense on the sideline for 1 minute and 15 seconds. And that doesn't help a defense that needed help.
Every time I've watched Josh Hoover play, I've been impressed. And
God bless, that kid's good.
He's good. I think he's really good. I think he's really, really good. 2 teams that are not really good one of them still could be, perhaps. What is happening to our Kansas Jayhawks, Drake? What in the world is going on? You talk about one of the most disappointing teams in college football this season. I talked about NC State yesterday. I talked about Kansas. I'm sure West Virginia fans are really disappointed with the 1-2 start that they have. I predicted them to start 1-2, and so I'm not particularly shocked that West Virginia is regressing back from what they were a season ago. But these 2 teams square off this week, and just let this go through your head, everybody, in Big 12 land out there. One of these fan bases is going to be 1-3. 1-3 after this game, which is in Morgantown. I think the loser can kiss their Big 12 championship hopes goodbye, because if Kansas, you're not winning this game, you can only lose one more to get in the conference title game, and you need some help. And boy, it just doesn't feel like you're going to have the team to do that if you lose your 3rd consecutive ball game. What do you make of the Mountaineers and the Jayhawks this week?
This is the we might really, really suck bowl, and whoever loses this game really, really sucks. And West Virginia was bad under Neil Brown for a couple of years, and Kansas was bad for more than that in the last 2 decades. This game is... Can
you please use a word stronger than bad to describe Kansas before Leipold got there and got things going?
Yeah, putrid. Like doormat, bottom of the barrel, losing to FCS teams every year. 1-11 was a miracle. West Virginia, this is a keep-your-job game for Neil Brown, as last week kind of was too. The way they lost, everyone points and goes, how do we give up 14 points in the last 4 minutes? That guy. And goes back to the Neil Brown 2022 when you thought that he was dead to rights. And for Kansas, Lance Leipold is obviously very safe. They could go 2-10 and he would still be very, very safe in Lawrence. But this game it puts a big question mark on Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator. So each school has at least one coach represented in this game that's on the chopping block if they lose.
Drake Toll, Locked On Big 12. Appreciate it. That is going to be an exciting game, to say the least, in the worst but best way in Morgantown. Drake, thanks as always.
Spencer,
Yes, indeed. Thank you. How better way could we end the segment than that? We're sticking with the Big 12 because it's a newsy day. It's a newsy time around what some have called America's Conference. Others would call it a truck stop conference. I haven't used either of those terms before, so I'll just throw that out there. Is BYU the most surprising team in the league? Jake Hatch, Locked on BYU, is coming up next. First, let's talk about FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. That's why we talk about them so much here at the network. They are number one. Guess what? We got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5. $5. And get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Do you understand how great of a deal that is? $5 for a 3-week free trial. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is Google account and a current form of payment, and guess what? You can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's number one sportsbook. Plus, everything you want for college football is over on FanDuel. Lines, money line, anything. Conference title odds, national championship odds, everything you want for college football gambling is over there. Visit FanDuel.com to download America's number one sportsbook. The most surprising team in the Big 12, for me, is BYU. Some of you might say Arizona State. I was not surprised Arizona State is going to be 3-0 entering Big 12 play, but BYU is that as well. Who had the Cougars and Sun Devils at 6-0 entering conference play on their bingo cards? Jake Hatch of Locked on BYU. Who had that?
I would say exactly nobody at this point. The biggest thing is both of those programs were considered to be programs that were going to struggle, but so far so good.
Yeah, it's been quite good. And I don't know how sustainable what each team is doing right now. It feels like they have got the moxie, they have got the culture, and that's what's winning them football games. I don't know if they have the high-end talent to continue, and we'll talk about BYU and Kansas State in the second half of the segment, but through 3 games, Jake, the big win at SMU, dominating Wyoming this past week amidst some challenging environment circumstances to be in over there in Laramie. Why is BYU undefeated?
Their defense. Their defense is allowing less than half of what they allowed a season ago in terms of overall points per game. They're averaging 14 points per game on defense. They have almost matched half of their sack output from a season ago. Really, Jay Hill and what he's endeavored to do with this BYU defense is completely remarkable. This is a team, a lot of those guys were part of that defense a season ago that was awful. It was sub 100 in a lot of categories. They brought him back, bet on continuity, added a few pieces to the defense, guys like Jack Kelly and Mark Collins, but it's paid off. And they've been absolutely dominant on the defensive side of the football, and that's been a big reason why they're 3-0.
What has Kalani Sitake's message been through the first 3 games that you think is resonating with his team? Is it that they were, not expected to do a whole heck of a lot? Is it just continuing the culture, getting back to, what they had in Provo in that 2021 season? Like, what is he doing that's clicking right now?
He's preaching toughness. That's the thing about this is a program a season ago that I think got a little down on themselves, and there were some off the field issues with players not being fully invested a season ago. This is a program that went back to the drawing board in the offseason. There were multiple videos that came out of strength and conditioning coaches saying, hey, you guys want to go 5-7 again? Keep doing what you're doing. Essentially, they were told, if you guys want to be a better team, you got to put in the time, you got to put in the effort. And so far, they have shown that their culture, the overall toughness, it is absolutely leveled up this season.
One of the reasons that I and many others were not particularly high on BYU coming into this year was, they struggled last year, but you're in a deep quarterback conference, and Jake Ratzlaff kind of leaves something to be desired. What have you seen from the Cougars quarterback so far?
He's still hot and cold. There are still turnover issues. You look at that SMU game where he had 2 interceptions and a fumble loss that obviously almost cost BYU in that matchup. But the one thing in that SMU game, for example, that I saw is that even with those turnover issues he had, which had BYU fans irate, he came back, drove the Cougars down the field twice late in that game to get the points necessary to win that game. He is showing a bounce back ability this season that I think is going to benefit BYU. Are there still going to be issues at times of him having that gunslinger mentality where he's going to try and fit a pass into a window that he's not supposed to? Yeah, I think so. But I think if he continues to kind of work his way towards being the quarterback BYU envisions he can become, he is going to play a big role in BYU's chances of getting to bowl eligibility and beyond this season. They need him to be playing at a higher level. Currently, he's trending towards about 3,400 yards passing, about 28 touchdowns and roughly 12 interceptions. And those aren't necessarily gaudy numbers, but those would be, I think, numbers enough that would help BYU get to at least 6 wins if he can continue the pace he's on.
Jake, are you telling me that fans of a college football team were rabidly upset, probably in the online space, when the quarterback was committing turnovers? Is this what you're breaking to me? I've never heard of this before.
Well, let's put it this way. Jake Retzloff was the highest rated Big 12 quarterback at PFF this past week after his performance against Wyoming. If you were to pay attention to the discourse online amongst most BYU fans, you would think he was 16th on that list. There is like this disconnect of how well he's playing versus what the perception is of him as a quarterback amongst BYU fans. So yeah, they've got there's an interesting dynamic playing out, but you're right. Fan bases, they're nothing if not irrational at times.
No, that's why we love them, sort of. Let's talk about this upcoming game, because this, to me, is a prove-it game for BYU, and at some level for Kansas State. Can you go on the road? This is one of the top Big 12 teams that will come into Lavelle Edwards Stadium this year. Oklahoma State will show up in the month of October as well. So there are going to be some big home games for BYU, but this is the first one because you're 3-0, and that looks great, and it is great. You dominated Wyoming. I forget who they even played week one. It was
Southern Illinois.
Okay. I'm going to let that speak for itself. Week two, though, you went on the road and you beat an SMU team that some saw as maybe a dark horse contender in the ACC. I think it's clear the Mustangs are not that, but they're still a capable program and team coming into this year with a returning head coach and quarterback and some weapons, and BYU kind of forced them into having some quarterback issues because of how the defense played in that football game. But when you look at this Kansas State game, I think this is a massive opportunity for BYU to say, hey, this is not some fluky 3-0 week schedule start. We're here to push towards the upper half of the Big 12 conference. You have to win this football game, but the opportunity is right in front of you.
Yeah, if BYU wants to legitimize the 3-0 in most people's eyes, go and beat Kansas State. That is a team that I would actually make people sit up and say, hold on, what did BYU just do? I think it's a legitimizing type win if they can pull it off. Now, that's much easier said than done because this is a Kansas State squad that is going to come into Provo fully expecting to roll out of Provo with a victory.
When you look at this Kansas State team, number one thing that stands out, they're going to run the football. Yeah. They're going to run the football. They're going to run the football, and they're going to keep on running the football. Avery Johnson looks like Lamar Jackson out there in more ways than one. He moves easily. He's explosive. He's dynamic. They're going to run him a lot. He can make some throws, and then he will throw it into the stands to the hot girl in row 3, as Drake Tola, Locked On Big 12, told us earlier on this particular show. How do the Cougars match up against this Kansas State team at a glance, particularly the rushing attack?
The first thing is shut down the run as much as they can. They've been actually very good at slowing down rushing attacks. Speaking of the running backs this season, the concern I've got, Spencer, is the QB run game, where these quarterbacks that scramble, and Avery Johnson's among the best in the entire country at it, have been really kind of the big bugaboo for BYU on defense. They have absolutely gashed BYU at times in all 3 games to date. So I think the bigger thing for BYU is they got to work on their QB spy package. A guy like Isaiah Glass, who's been an absolute revelation, a linebacker this year for BYU, 6'5", with sideline-to-sideline ability to run with a guy like Avery Johnson. I think you essentially just tell him, you find Avery Johnson and you make sure he doesn't get loose, and BYU has to be very disciplined in their pass rush. They got to stay in their lanes, contain Avery Johnson. If they do that, I think they'll give themselves a fighting chance.
When you look at BYU's offense, Jake, what do they have to accomplish in this football game? I'd look at Retzlaff and say, you got to protect the football, because if you turn the ball over against this Kansas State team, look how that went for Arizona last week. Curious that this is going to be a really fun game, I think, for Kansas State. I think they're going to get more of a challenge this week against BYU than Arizona gave them in Manhattan a week ago. It's your first conference road game. BYU's riding high. Crowd's going to be on fire. On paper, coming into the year, a lot of people would have said, well, Arizona's going to give you a tougher game. Arizona's better. And I look at this and go, well, they beat Arizona 31-7. What does the offense need to do to have more success than the Wildcats did last week?
Number one thing is find better options in the run game than they have right now. The simple fact of the matter is 3 of the top 4 running backs for BYU have injury issues right now. LJ Martin, their starter, got injured against SMU. Same with Hinckley Rapati. Neither one of them played against Wyoming last week. The thought was that Enoch Nawahine would step into that role. He didn't play against Wyoming, and Kalani Sitake admitted after the game he's banged up. So that leaves you with Miles Davis and a freshman return missionary in Pokai Haunga. The good news is Haunga came in late in that game against Wyoming and averaged 7 yards per pop. Can he extrapolate that over more than 5 carries? We'll find out. But they absolutely have to be able to balance this offense and be able to run the ball on Kansas State. Now, 3 of your top 4 running backs, if they're not unable to go, that doesn't bode well for BYU to do that. But I think you tell your offensive line, led by guys like Connor Pay and Caleb Etienne, you guys absolutely have to get the job done, because if you don't, we're going to have a very, very tough time moving the ball consistently down the field.
Stop me if you've heard this one before, folks. The ground game is going to decide who wins the football game.
Well, and I'll also add this. BYU in Lavelle Edwards Stadium is absolutely about as raucous as it gets after dark. I look at that Kansas State game when they went to Tulane a couple of weeks ago, and it was like 25,000 and change, and Kansas State looked a little bit rattled. 63,000 people in Lavelle Edwards Stadium is going to be even louder than it was at Tulane. So I think that the juice that the BYU fan base will give BYU after they return home after 2 straight road games, that could be another edge for BYU, because Kansas State's going to come in and be like, wow, these people are absolutely nuts. And the best part is they're stone cold sober to boot.
Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU. Jake, appreciate it.
Absolutely. Anytime, my man.
Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.